Please, Mom, just sign here." Vanessa's voice was as sweet and as persuasive as it had been when she was a little girl begging me for candy money. But now, at 35, her hand pressed mine down on a pen as her husband, Sebastian, held my arm with a grip that ached to my bones. We were in a bank, surrounded by people going about their normal business, oblivious to the drama unfolding at our table. "It's just routine, Mom. A small transfer to get some paperwork sorted out." But I knew she was lying. I had seen the documents. It wasn't a small transfer. It was everything. My $50,000 in savings, all that was left after my husband Peter passed away 3 years ago. The bank's air conditioning hummed over our heads, but I felt a hot, sticky wave of panic. The fluorescent lights hurt my eyes, and the sound of the cash counting machines hammered in my temples. Vanessa smiled for the security cameras, as if we were a normal family doing normal business. Sebastian smiled too, but his fingers remained clamped on my arm like a vice. "Come on, Olivia," he whispered in my ear. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." His breath smelled of cigarettes and cold coffee. "Think of your granddaughter, Caroline. Think of everything we've done for you." Everything they had done for me. The irony burned in my throat. I was the one who had paid for Vanessa's college. I was the one who had given her the down payment for her house. I was the one who had covered Sebastian's debts when he lost his job last year, $20,000 they never paid back. And now they were here, trying to steal the last thing I had, my widow's pension, the money Peter and I had saved over 46 years of marriage. My hands trembled as I held the pen. The ink looked so black, so final on the white paper. One signature and it would all be over. One signature and I would be left with nothing. Vanessa leaned in closer, her sweet perfume mixing with the anxious scent on my skin. "Mom, trust me, it's for your own good. You can't manage this much money at your age." Her words were poisoned honey, each syllable calculated to disarm me. I looked around desperately. The young teller watched us from his window, but he seemed busy with other customers. An older woman waited in line, flipping through an insurance brochure. A man in a suit checked his phone. No one noticed what was happening. No one saw that I was being robbed in broad daylight, in public, with smiles and affectionate words. Sebastian squeezed my arm tighter, and a choked sob escaped my throat. "Shut up," he muttered through a smile. "We don't want to make a scene, do we?" His eyes were cold as ice, and for the first time, I realized this man was capable of anything. Vanessa, my own daughter, the child I had breastfed and raised, sat there and watched her husband hurt me without doing a thing to stop him. The wall clock read 3:15 in the afternoon, a regular Tuesday that had become the worst nightmare of my life. I remembered how I had gotten here. Vanessa had called me that morning, her voice filled with fake urgency. "Mom, we need to go to the bank. There are some papers you have to sign. It's important." She hadn't given me any details. She never gave me details, just orders disguised as pleas. The bank manager, an older man named Mr. Thompson, approached our table with a professional smile. "Everything all right here? Can I help with anything?" His presence gave me a spark of hope. This was my moment, my only chance. My heart hammered so hard I thought it would break through my chest. I quickly scribbled on a piece of paper on the table. "Help. I'm being coerced. I don't want to sign." I folded the note and slid it to him when Vanessa and Sebastian were distracted, looking at the documents. Mr. Thompson discreetly opened the note, and I saw his eyes widen. His professional expression transformed into one of controlled alarm. For a moment that felt like an eternity. Our eyes met, and in that instant I knew he understood perfectly. Without saying a word, he discreetly pressed a button under his desk. The silent alarm. My heart calmed for the first time all afternoon. Someone was going to help me. But to understand how I had reached this moment, I need to tell you the full story. I need you to understand who I was before I became this desperate woman in a bank, silently begging for help. My name is Olivia Anderson. I am 69 years old, and all my life I was the woman who always said yes, the woman who always gave, always helped, and always sacrificed for her family, especially for Vanessa. I remember the day she was born as if it were yesterday. It was a spring morning, and after 12 hours of labor, she finally came into the world, small, perfect, with the green eyes she inherited from her father. I held her in my arms and promised her she would never lack for anything, that she would always have my love, my support, and my protection. I kept that promise for 35 years, but now I realize I may have kept it too well. When Vanessa was 5, her father and I worked 2 jobs each to buy her the pink bicycle she wanted so badly for her birthday. It cost $200, a fortune for us back then, but it was worth it to see her smile. When she turned 15, she wanted to go to a summer camp that cost $1,500. I sold my grandmother's jewelry to pay for it. When she graduated from high school, she insisted on going to a private university. "Mom, it's my dream," she'd say with tears in her eyes. "I can't go to a state school. What will my friends think?" The tuition was $40,000 a year. $40,000 we didn't have. Her father and I took out a loan, using our house as collateral. I worked extra shifts at the hospital cafeteria for 4 years, cleaning tables late into the night, my feet swollen and my back aching, all so Vanessa could have her college degree. She graduated with honors in business administration, and I cried with pride at the ceremony. I thought I could finally rest, that I had fulfilled my duty as a mother, but Vanessa had other plans. At 25, she met Sebastian at a dive bar. He was handsome, I couldn't deny that, but there was something in his eyes I didn't like, a coldness, a calculation that put me on edge. When he introduced himself, the first thing he did was ask if the house was paid off, not, "It's nice to meet you, ma'am." No, just a question about money. I should have seen that as a red flag. Their wedding cost $50,000. "Mom, I'm only getting married once," Vanessa pleaded. "I want it to be perfect." I wanted to object, to tell her we didn't have that kind of money, that her father had just been diagnosed with diabetes, and we needed to save for his medication. But I saw her so happy, so excited that I couldn't say no. We took out another loan. The wedding was beautiful, I have to admit. Vanessa looked radiant in her white lace dress, like a storybook princess. Sebastian smiled, but I noticed his eyes were constantly scanning the wealthier guests, calculating and evaluating. After their honeymoon in Europe, another $5,000 expense we had to cover because they couldn't possibly go without a honeymoon, Vanessa and Sebastian moved into a small apartment. For 6 months, I thought they had finally grown up, that they would stand on their own 2 feet. But then the calls started. "Mom, the refrigerator broke." "Mom, the car needs repairs." "Mom, Sebastian lost his job and we can't pay rent." It was always an emergency, always urgent, and I always said yes. $500 here, $1,000 there. Small amounts that, when added up, represented my financial peace of mind. 2 years into their marriage, Vanessa announced they wanted to buy a house. "It's an investment, Mom, a step toward the future." The house cost $200,000, and they needed $40,000 for the down payment. They had no savings, of course. Their credit was bad, of course. "Could you help us, Mom? Just with the down payment. I promise we'll pay you back every penny." That was the biggest promise Vanessa ever made me, and also the biggest lie. I withdrew $40,000 from the retirement fund I had been building for 20 years. Every dollar represented extra hours worked, meals I didn't buy, clothes I didn't allow myself, vacations I never took, but I gave it to them. I sat in the bank that day, signing the early withdrawal papers with trembling hands as the bank officer explained the penalties I'd have to pay. A 10% penalty, $4,000 I'd lose just for taking out my own money early. "Are you sure about this, ma'am?" the employee asked with genuine concern. "Once you withdraw these funds, there's no turning back." I told him I was sure. It was for my daughter. It was for her future. It was for giving her the stability I never had. I signed the papers and walked to Vanessa's house with the check in my hand, feeling like a hero. I was going to save the day. I was going to make my daughter's American dream possible. Vanessa cried when I handed her the check. Tears of happiness, I thought. "You're the best mom in the world," she said, hugging me tight. "I don't know how to thank you for this. I promise, Mom, I promise I'll pay you back every last cent, with interest." Sebastian seemed emotional too, though his hug felt cold and calculated. "Thanks, Ma," he said. "This means a lot to us." They moved into the house 3 months later. It was beautiful, I have to admit. 2 stories, 4 bedrooms, a large backyard with space for a pool. Vanessa invited me to the housewarming, and I walked through every room with pride. My sacrifice had been worth it. My daughter had her own home, but the calls didn't stop. If anything, they became more frequent. "Mom, we need furniture for the house. We can't live on the floor." $10,000 for a new living room set. "Mom, the house needs a new fence. The neighbors are complaining." $3,000 for a wooden fence. "Mom, we want to renovate the kitchen. It's so old and the stove doesn't work well." $8,000 for new appliances. Every time I hesitated, every time I mentioned that I had expenses too, that money didn't grow on trees, Vanessa knew exactly which buttons to push. "Mom, I thought you'd be happy to see us doing well. I thought you'd want your granddaughter to grow up in a nice house." And so Caroline, my 8-year-old granddaughter, the light of my eyes, became the most powerful argument in Vanessa's manipulative arsenal. Caroline had been born when Vanessa was 27, and from the moment I saw her, I knew she was different. She had her grandfather's curious eyes and a smile that could melt the hardest heart. But more than that, she had something her mother had lost somewhere along the way: genuine kindness. When Caroline visited me, she would bring me drawings she had made at school, little crayon artworks where I was a giant grandma with huge arms always smiling. "I made you big because your love is big, Grandma," she would explain in her sweet little voice. It was impossible to say no to anything that was for Caroline. Ballet classes, $200 a month. Piano lessons, $300 a month. Summer camp, $2,500. Special clothes for ballet recitals, $500 per outfit. "Caroline has talent, Mom. We can't let her potential go to waste for lack of money." Meanwhile, my own financial situation was deteriorating. Peter had developed complications from his diabetes. His medications cost $400 a month, and insurance only covered a portion. He needed special injections, regular visits to the specialist, and a strict diet that required more expensive foods. I worked double shifts at the hospital. I would come home with my feet bleeding inside my shoes, only to cook, clean, and care for my husband. "Why don't you ask Vanessa for help?" my sister Clara suggested during one of her visits. "You've spent over $100,000 on her in the last 5 years. Surely she can help with some of the medical expenses." But I couldn't ask my daughter for money. It was my job to care for my family, not the other way around. It was my responsibility to be strong, to be the pillar that held everyone up. Peter passed away early one Tuesday morning, 3 years after his diagnosis. I was holding his hand when he took his last breath, and I swear I felt half of my soul leave with him. We had been married for 46 years. He was my partner, my best friend, my accomplice in all the difficult decisions about Vanessa. After his funeral, I sat alone in our empty house and realized I was completely broke. The medical expenses, combined with everything I had given Vanessa, had drained our savings. Peter's life insurance gave me $50,000. It was all I had left to live on for the rest of my days. I deposited it into a savings account and promised myself I would be more careful. I was going to make that money last. I was going to learn to say no. But Vanessa had other plans. 2 months after the funeral, Sebastian lost his job at a construction company. "It was his racist boss's fault," Vanessa explained, crying on the phone. "He fired him for no reason. Now we can't pay the mortgage. Mom, they're going to foreclose on the house. Caroline will have to change schools. She'll lose all her friends." They asked me for $20,000 just to stay afloat until Sebastian found another job. 6 months max. "We'll pay you back with interest. I promise." It was almost half of what I had left, But the thought of Caroline losing her home broke my heart. I gave them the money again. Sebastian found a job 3 months later, but the money never came back. When I asked about it, there was always an excuse. "We're paying off old debts, Mom. We had unexpected expenses with the car. Caroline needed to go to the dentist, and insurance didn't cover everything." And now, here I was in this bank, watching them try to steal the last $30,000 I had left. My daughter, the child I had raised with so much love, was sitting next to her abusive husband, smiling for the cameras as they planned to leave me in absolute poverty. Mr. Thompson returned to our table, accompanied by 2 security guards who tried to look casual, but I could see the tension in their posture. Vanessa and Sebastian hadn't noticed anything yet. They were too focused on the papers, reviewing the numbers over and over like vultures calculating their spoils. "Excuse me," Mr. Thompson said in a calm but firm voice. "I need to review some details of this transaction before we proceed." Sebastian looked up, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of nervousness in his eyes. "What kind of details?" "Everything's in order. Mrs. Anderson wants to transfer the money to her daughter's account. It's a family decision." His hand was still squeezing my arm, but he was doing it more discreetly now, aware that other eyes were watching. "I understand," Mr. Thompson replied, "but bank protocol requires me to verify that all parties involved are acting voluntarily and without external pressure." His words were like a bolt of lightning cutting through the storm of my desperation. He looked directly into my eyes. "Mrs. Anderson, would you mind accompanying me to my office for a private verification? It's standard procedure for transactions of this magnitude." Vanessa immediately tensed. "That's not necessary, sir. My mother has already decided, haven't you, Mom?" Her smile had become forced, artificial, like a mask that was cracking. "We can do everything right here. We don't want to cause you any trouble." But Mr. Thompson was already standing, extending his hand to me. "It's bank policy, ma'am. There are no exceptions." The guards positioned themselves discreetly near our table. "It will only take a few minutes." I stood up, my legs trembling, and for the first time all afternoon, Sebastian had to release my arm. Vanessa grabbed my other hand. "Mom, don't make this difficult. Just sign the papers and let's go home. Caroline is waiting for us." She used my granddaughter's name as if it were a master key that would unlock all the doors of my resistance. "I'll be right back," I murmured, not daring to look her in the eyes. I knew if I saw her face, if I saw that innocent little girl expression she had perfected over the years, I might waver. I might give in one more time. Mr. Thompson's office was small but cozy, with pictures of his family on his desk and a little cactus in the window. He sat across from me and closed the door. "Mrs. Anderson," he said gently, "tell me what's really going on." And then, like a dam that finally breaks, it all came out. I told him about the years of manipulation, about the money I had given without getting anything back, about the broken promises and the lies wrapped in pretty paper. I told him how Sebastian had hurt my arm, how Vanessa had used Caroline's name to emotionally blackmail me. I explained that those $30,000 were all I had left to live on, that without them, I would end up on the streets. Mr. Thompson listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally, taking notes in a notebook. When I finished my story, he sighed deeply. "Ma'am, what you're describing is financial coercion, and in some cases, elder abuse. What your daughter and son-in-law are doing is illegal." Illegal. The word echoed in my head. All these years, I had thought it was my duty, my responsibility as a mother, to give until it hurt. It had never occurred to me that what Vanessa was doing could have a legal name, that it could be a crime. "What can I do?" I asked, my voice breaking. "She's my daughter. I don't want to get her in trouble, but I can't go on like this. I don't have anything left to give." Mr. Thompson leaned forward. "First, we're going to cancel this transaction. Second, I'm going to document everything you've told me. Third, I'm going to give you information on legal and protective resources for seniors." He paused. "But ma'am, the most important decision is yours to make. Are you ready to say no? Are you ready to set boundaries, even if it means your daughter gets angry?" That question hit me like a punch to the gut. Was I ready? For 69 years, my identity had been built around being the woman who always said yes, the woman who always gave, the woman who sacrificed for others. If I stopped being that person, who would I be? I thought of Peter, of how he had worked until the day he died to support our family. I thought of the times I had eaten beans for weeks so I could pay for Vanessa's private school. I thought of all the nights I had stayed awake, calculating expenses, clipping coupons, looking for ways to stretch every dollar. And then I thought of Caroline, my 8-year-old granddaughter, who was growing up watching her mother manipulate her grandmother. What kind of lessons was she learning? That love could be bought with money? That it was okay to hurt those who love you if you get what you want? That older people were resources to be exploited until they were exhausted? Yes, I said finally, and my voice sounded stronger than I had expected. I'm ready. Mr. Thompson smiled and began to write. All right, we're going to start by putting an alert on all your accounts. No one will be able to make transactions without your physical presence and an additional identity verification. I'm also going to give you the number for a hotline to report elder abuse. As he worked, I looked out his office window. I could see Vanessa and Sebastian in the waiting area. She was pacing back and forth, talking on the phone with agitated gestures. He remained seated, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he was drumming his fingers on the table. They knew something had gone wrong. They knew their plan was falling apart. For the first time in years, I didn't feel guilty about disappointing them. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time: control, power, the ability to make my own decisions without someone else telling me what to do or how to feel about it. Mr. Thompson finished writing and handed me several papers. This is a copy of our incident report. This is the number for the helpline. And this, he handed me a small card, is my direct extension. If they pressure or threaten you again, call me immediately. I took the papers with hands that no longer trembled. What do I do now? How do I explain to them that I'm not going to sign? Tell them the truth, Mr. Thompson replied. That you've decided to keep your money for your own living expenses. You don't have to justify anything else. It's your money, ma'am. You worked for it, you saved it, and you have every right to keep it for yourself. I took a deep breath. It was time to face my daughter. It was time to become a person who could say no. It was time to start living for myself, even if it meant breaking a lifelong pattern. We walked out of the office together. Vanessa immediately approached, her face a mix of anxiety and contained anger. What took so long, Mom? We're going to be late. I looked at my daughter, this 35-year-old woman who had built her entire life on my inability to deny her anything. And for the first time in decades, I said the words that would change everything. I'm not going to sign, Vanessa. I'm not transferring my money. The silence that followed was deafening. Vanessa looked at me as if I had just slapped her, her green eyes shining with a mix of shock and fury I had never seen before. Sebastian got up from his chair so abruptly he almost knocked it over, his fists clenched at his sides. What do you mean you're not going to sign? Vanessa asked in a trembling voice, trying to maintain a fake smile for the bank cameras. Mom, we already talked about this. It's just a temporary transfer. It's not temporary, Vanessa, I replied in a voice I didn't recognize as my own. It was firm, decisive, like that of a woman who had finally found her backbone after years of letting others bend it to their will. And it's not a transfer. It's my retirement money, and I'm keeping it. Sebastian took a step closer, but the security guards immediately moved as well, positioning themselves between us. Olivia, he said in that soft voice he used when he wanted to manipulate me, don't be ridiculous. What are you going to do with all that money? You don't have any big expenses. We can invest it better, make it grow for the whole family. For the whole family? I repeated, and a bitter laugh escaped my throat. Like when you invested the $40,000 for your house down payment, or when you invested the $20,000 I gave you when you lost your job. Tell me, Sebastian, how much of that have you paid back? I saw his mask of fake concern crack. His eyes hardened, revealing the calculating coldness that had always been there, but that I had been too blind to see. Those were gifts, he muttered between gritted teeth. You said they were gifts. I never said that, I retorted, and the words came out of me like boiling water finally finding a crack in the pot. You promised you would pay me back. You promised it was temporary. You promised a lot of things you never fulfilled. Vanessa started to cry, but these weren't the genuine tears of pain I had seen when she was a child and scraped her knee. These were calculated tears, performance tears, tears designed to break my resolve. Mom, I can't believe you're doing this to me. After everything we've shared, after all the love we've given each other. Love? The word shot out of my mouth like a bullet. You call threatening me love? You call it love when your husband hurts my arm? You call it love when you trick me into coming here to steal everything I have? People in the bank started to turn their heads. An older woman waiting in line watched us with concern. A young man in a suit had stopped checking his phone and was staring openly. Vanessa realized the attention we were attracting and lowered her voice, but the intensity of her desperation only increased. "Okay," she whispered, wiping away her tears with the back of her hand. "Don't transfer everything. Just half. $10,000 is all we need to get out of this jam." "What jam, Vanessa?" I asked, and I could see the question took her by surprise. "Sebastian has a job. You have a house. What exactly is the emergency that requires my retirement money?" She was silent for a moment, and in that silence, I saw the truth I had been avoiding for years. There was no emergency, no real crisis. There were just two adults who had built their lifestyle around my inability to say no. They had spent more than they earned because they knew Mom would always be there to make up the difference. "Vanessa," I continued, "you are 35 years old. Your husband is 38. You both have college degrees that I paid for. You both have jobs. It's time for you to learn to live on your own income." "What about Caroline?" Sebastian asked, playing his strongest card. "What about your granddaughter? Are you going to let her suffer because her grandmother became selfish?" That word, selfish, hit me like a slap. All my life I had feared being selfish. I had sacrificed my wants, my needs, my dreams. Also, I wouldn't be selfish. But now, standing in that bank with my last $30,000 about to be stolen, I realized something fundamental. It wasn't selfish to take care of myself. It was survival. "Caroline is not going to suffer," I said firmly. "You can continue to provide for her with your own income, just like millions of responsible parents do all over the world. What you can't do is use my love for my granddaughter to manipulate me." Mr. Thompson cleared his throat. "Mrs. Wilson, Mr. Wilson, you need to leave. Mrs. Anderson has made it very clear that she does not wish to proceed with this transaction, and continuing to pressure her constitutes harassment." "She's my mom," Vanessa snapped. "I have a right to talk to my mom." "Not when you're intimidating her on bank property," Mr. Thompson replied with authority. "The guards will escort you out." Vanessa looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't disappointment. It was pure, crystallized hatred, forged after years of hidden resentment. "Fine, Mom," she said in a voice as cold as ice. "If that's what you want. But don't come crying when you're all alone in that empty house, with no one to visit you, with no one to care about you. And don't call when you need help," Sebastian added. "Don't call when you're sick or when you can't manage the stairs. We're not your personal health insurance." Their words were designed to scare me, to make me imagine a lonely, unprotected future. And they worked, partially. I felt a chill of fear run down my spine. What if I really did get sick? What if I did need help? What if this decision to keep my money cost me my family? But then I remembered something Peter had told me shortly before he passed away. We were sitting in the living room watching a television show about scams targeting seniors, and he had commented, "Olivia, fear is the most powerful tool manipulators have. They make you imagine all the horrors that could happen to you if you don't do what they want. But the truth is, most of those things never happen. And if they do, you face them when they come, not before." "I understand," I said to Vanessa, and my voice sounded calmer than I felt inside. "If that's your decision, I accept it. But I'm not going to change mine out of fear of what might happen in the future. The security guards moved closer. "Folks, it's time to go," one of them said with professional firmness. Vanessa snatched up her purse with sharp, angry movements. "This isn't over, Mom. We'll talk about this at home when you don't have these strangers filling your head with ridiculous ideas." "No," I said, and the word came out stronger than I had expected. "We are not going to talk about this at home. Not until you're ready to accept my decision without trying to change it." They left without looking back. Sebastian with a possessive hand on Vanessa's back, whispering something in her ear that made her shoulders tense even more. I watched them walk toward the parking lot through the bank windows. Two figures walking away from my life, taking with them years of manipulation and emotional blackmail. When I could no longer see them, I sat down heavily in one of the chairs in the waiting area. My legs were trembling, not from fear, but from the release of years of pent-up tension. I had done something I never thought I would be capable of. I had said no to my daughter. I had chosen my well-being over her manipulation. Mr. Thompson came over and sat beside me. "How do you feel?" he asked. I thought about it for a moment before answering. "Scared," I admitted, "but also free, as if I can finally breathe after years of holding my breath." The days that followed were the hardest of my life. Not because I missed Vanessa and Sebastian, but because I had to confront the reality of who I had been for all these years. I sat in my empty living room, surrounded by family photos that now seemed to mock me from their golden frames, and I asked myself questions I had avoided for decades. When had I lost my voice? When had I stopped being Olivia and become simply Vanessa's mom? The calls started that same night. My phone rang every hour, showing Vanessa's name on the screen. I didn't answer any of them. On the second day, the text messages started. "Mom, I know you're mad, but we need to talk. Mom, Caroline is asking about you. She's so sad. Mom, Sebastian says he's sorry if he hurt you." It wasn't his intention. Each message was a new needle of guilt trying to pierce the armor of determination I had built. On the third day, they showed up at my door. I saw them through the living room window's curtains. Vanessa, in a yellow dress I knew was my favorite color, Sebastian with his best fake smile, and Caroline holding hands between them. My granddaughter was carrying a drawing, probably another of her portraits of the giant grandma with huge arms. My heart ached to see her, but I didn't open the door. Vanessa rang the doorbell for 10 minutes straight, then started knocking. "Mom, I know you're in there. Your car is in the driveway, please. We just want to talk." Her voice grew more desperate with each plea. "Caroline misses you. Look, she made you a drawing." I heard my granddaughter's small voice. "Why won't Grandma open the door, Mommy? Did I do something wrong?" The sound of that innocent question nearly broke me. I almost ran to open the door. I almost fell back into the familiar pattern of giving in to emotional manipulation. But I remembered Mr. Thompson's words. Fear and guilt are the most powerful tools of manipulators. I backed away from the window and retreated to my bedroom, where I couldn't hear them. I put on some classical music on the small radio Peter had given me for our 30th anniversary and tried to block out the sound of their voices. After an hour, they finally left. That night, my younger sister Clara called me. "Olivia, Vanessa told me what happened at the bank. She says you've become paranoid, that you think they want to steal from you." Her voice had that condescending tone she used when she thought someone was being irrational. "She says they just wanted to help you invest your money better." "Is that what she told you?" I asked, and I could hear the bitterness in my own voice. "Did she also tell you her husband hurt my arm? Did she tell you I had to pass a secret note to the bank manager asking for help?" Clara was silent for a moment. "He really hurt you?" "He really hurt me." And Vanessa saw it and did nothing to stop him. The words came easier now, as if each time I said them, they became more real, more valid. "Clara, they've taken over $100,000 from me in the last 10 years. They've never paid back a single cent, and now they wanted the last $30,000 I have left." "But Olivia," Clara said gently, "she's your daughter. Families help each other out." "Families do help each other out," I agreed. But this wasn't help. This was exploitation. There's a difference between helping out occasionally and being treated like a personal ATM. After hanging up with my sister, I realized that even the people who loved me didn't fully understand what I had been through. They had seen the money transfers, but they hadn't seen the emotional manipulation. They had seen the generous gifts, but they hadn't seen the veiled threats when I hesitated. It was impossible to explain years of subtle abuse to someone who had only seen the surface. On the fourth day, Caroline showed up at my door alone. My heart stopped when I saw her through the window in her school uniform and with her pink backpack, standing on my porch as if nothing had changed. This time I did open the door because I knew an 8-year-old girl wasn't responsible for her parents' manipulations. "Hi, Grandma," she said with that smile that could light up entire cities. "Mommy says you're mad at us, but I didn't do anything wrong, did I?" I knelt down to her level, swallowing the tears that threatened to fall. "No, my love, you didn't do anything wrong. Grandma isn't mad at you." "Then why haven't you come to visit? Why don't you answer the phone when Mommy calls from home?" Her green eyes, so much like Vanessa's, but filled with genuine innocence, watched me with confusion. "Caroline," I said, choosing my words carefully. "Sometimes adults have problems they need to work out, but that doesn't mean Grandma doesn't love you. I will always love you no matter what. Can I come in? I made you a new drawing." She held up a sheet of paper she had been holding against her chest. I let her in and we sat in the living room while she explained her drawing. It was like all the others. I was a giant figure with huge arms, but this time something was different. Instead of smiling, the grandma in the drawing looked sad. "Why is Grandma sad in your drawing?" I asked her. "Because Mommy says you're sad. She says some bad men at the bank told you things that confused you." Caroline looked at me with those serious eyes that seemed too old for her face. "Is it true there are bad men, Grandma?" I realized Vanessa had already begun to construct her version of events, painting me as a confused victim manipulated by strangers. It was clever, I had to admit. By telling this version to Caroline, she not only controlled the narrative, but also prepared the ground for future manipulation attempts. "There are no bad men, Caroline," I said firmly. "The men at the bank are good. They helped me when I needed help." "But then why does Mommy say—" "Sometimes," I interrupted gently, "adults see the same things differently. Like when you and your friend look at a cloud and you say it looks like a cat, but she says it looks like a dog. You're both seeing the same cloud, but you interpret it differently." Caroline nodded solemnly, as if that explanation made perfect sense. We spent an hour coloring together, and for a moment, I could pretend that nothing had changed. But when it was time for her to go, because I knew Vanessa would come to pick her up soon, Caroline asked me a question that broke my heart. "Grandma, you're not going to give me money for my ballet classes anymore?" There it was. Even at 8 years old, Caroline had already learned to associate my love with my money. She had already internalized the lesson Vanessa had taught her, that Grandma was valuable for what she could give, not for who she was. "Caroline," I said, kneeling down to her level again, "do you love me because I give you money, or do you love me because I'm your grandma?" She looked confused by the question. "I love you because you're my grandma, but money is good too. Mommy says that's why you're the best grandma in the world, because you always help us when we need things." In that moment, I understood the deepest damage I had caused with my years of limitless generosity. I had not only allowed Vanessa to become financially dependent and emotionally manipulative, I had also taught my granddaughter that love was expressed through money, that family relationships had a transactional component. "Caroline," I said, "I want you to know something very important. I love you for who you are, not for what I can give you, and true love cannot be bought with money. Do you understand?" She nodded, but I could see in her eyes that the answer was more automatic than genuine. She was too young to fully grasp the concept, especially when her whole life's experience had taught her the opposite. When Vanessa arrived to pick up Caroline, she didn't get out of the car. She just honked from the driveway, as if I were a stranger watching her child. Caroline ran to the car, waved goodbye, and disappeared behind the vehicle's tinted windows. That night, sitting alone in my living room, I realized I had lost more than my money over the years. I had lost my identity, my voice, and my ability to have authentic relationships. But I also realized something else. For the first time in decades, I had the opportunity to reclaim all of it, all. A week after the incident at the bank, when I had already begun to get used to the strange silence of my house without Vanessa's constant calls, I had an unexpected visitor. It was a Sunday afternoon, and I was watering the garden plants that Peter had tended with so much love when I heard the doorbell. Through the peephole, there was a young woman I didn't immediately recognize. She was tall, with brown hair pulled back in a ponytail, and she had a nervous smile that seemed familiar. When I opened the door, I realized it was Caroline, but not the 8-year-old Caroline who had visited a few days earlier. This was an 18-year-old Caroline, a version of my granddaughter that existed only in my imagination of what she would be like when she grew up. But the confusion lasted only a second, because then the young woman spoke. "Mrs. Anderson, I'm Caroline, but not your granddaughter Caroline. I'm your great-niece, the daughter of Arthur, your sister Clara's son." Her voice was soft but determined. "I know we don't know each other well, but I needed to come talk to you." Arthur. The name brought back vague memories of a nephew I had seen at family gatherings as a child, but who had lost touch with our family when he moved north for work. "Please, come in," I said, stepping aside. "Would you like some tea?" We sat in the living room, and this other Caroline explained why she had come. "My dad told me what happened at the bank. Aunt Clara told him the whole story, and he asked me to come talk to you." She paused as if she were choosing her words carefully. "You see, Mrs. Anderson, I went through something very similar with my own mother." She told me her story while the tea cooled in our cups. Her mother, Arthur's ex-wife, had developed a gambling addiction after the divorce. For years, she had manipulated Caroline into giving her money from her part-time jobs, money from her college savings. She had even forged Caroline's signature on several student loans. "It was always an emergency," Caroline explained. "It was always the last time. She always promised she would pay me back, that she just needed a little more time." "And what did you do?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "At first, nothing. She was my mother. I was supposed to love her unconditionally, right? Good daughters were supposed to help their mothers." Her voice had a bitter edge that I recognized immediately. But then I realized it wasn't love she was asking for. It was survival, her survival at the expense of mine. She told me how she had had to cut off all contact with her mother for 2 years, how she had to learn to ignore the desperate calls, the guilt-tripping messages, the suicide threats that turned out to be empty manipulations. "It was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life," she admitted, "but it was also what saved me." "And now?" I asked. "How is your relationship with her?" "Better," Caroline replied with a small but genuine smile. "But only because I set firm boundaries and refused to move them. We have a relationship now, but it's an honest relationship. She knows she can't ask me for money. She knows if she lies or manipulates, I'll disappear again. And surprisingly, when we took money out of the equation, we discovered that there was real love underneath all the dysfunction. Her words gave me something I hadn't felt since the bank incident. Hope." "Do you think it's possible?" I asked. "Do you think Vanessa and I could have a real relationship someday?" "I don't know," Caroline answered honestly. "It depends on whether she's willing to change. But what I do know is that you have to be willing to maintain your boundaries no matter how much it hurts." She told me about a support group that met at the downtown library every Tuesday night. "It's for people who have experienced financial abuse from family members," she explained. "At first, I thought it was ridiculous. I didn't see myself as a victim of abuse. But when I went, I realized there were dozens of people just like us, parents, grandparents, siblings, all of whom had been manipulated by family members who knew exactly which buttons to push." Before she left, Caroline gave me a long, warm hug. "Mrs. Anderson, what you did at that bank was incredibly brave. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for taking care of yourself." That week flew by. For the first time in years, I started doing things just for me. I read books I had wanted to read for decades but had never had time for. I walked in the park where Peter and I used to stroll on Sunday mornings. I cooked meals that I liked, not the ones I knew Vanessa liked when she came to visit. On Tuesday night, I decided to go to the support group. The library was quiet, and in a small room in the back, I found 12 people sitting in a circle. There were men and women of all ages, but most were over 50. The facilitator, a woman named Sandra, greeted me warmly and told me to introduce myself only if I felt comfortable doing so. I listened to story after story that resonated with mine. A 70-year-old woman whose son had stolen $100,000 by forging checks. A 60-year-old man who had mortgaged his house 3 times to cover his brother's gambling debts. A woman my age whose daughter had convinced her to put the house in her name, only to discover later that she had sold it without telling her. When it was my turn to speak, the words came out like a river finally finding the sea. I told them about Vanessa, about the years of manipulation, about the incident at the bank. I expected judgment. I expected them to tell me I had been foolish or naive. Instead, I found understanding. I found validation. I found people who had lived through the exact same thing. Financial abuse by family members is one of the hardest types of abuse to recognize, Sandra explained after I finished, because it's wrapped in love, in family obligation, in guilt. The abusers know exactly what to say to make us feel like we're the ones being unreasonable. A woman named Eleanor, who had been in the group for 2 years, gave me the most valuable advice. Olivia, you are going to doubt your decision 1,000 times. You're going to ask yourself if you were too harsh, if you overreacted, if you should just call your daughter and apologize. Those moments of doubt are normal. But every time you feel that doubt, remember how you felt in that bank. Remember the fear, the physical pain, the desperation. Those feelings don't lie. When I got home that night, there were 3 voicemails from Vanessa on my answering machine. I listened to them, and for the first time, I could hear the manipulation clearly, as if someone had cleaned my ears after years of accumulated wax. Mom, Caroline asks about you every day. She's depressed. She doesn't understand why her grandma doesn't want to see her. Mom, Sebastian and I have been talking, and we think you should see a doctor. This behavior isn't normal for you. Mom, I'm starting to think maybe you're having memory problems. Have you considered you might be developing dementia? Each message was a new strategy. First, use Caroline as an emotional shield. Second, invalidate my ability to make rational decisions. Third, suggest that I had cognitive problems. It was like a manual of psychological manipulation executed with surgical precision. I deleted the messages without calling her back. The next day, while I was making breakfast, the phone rang. A number I didn't recognize appeared on the screen, so I answered, thinking it might be important. Grandma? It was my granddaughter Caroline, the 8-year-old, the real Caroline. Mommy borrowed her work phone to call you. She says you don't answer when we call from home anymore. My heart raced. Hello, my love. How are you? I'm good, but I miss you a lot. When are you going to come visit us? When are we going to go to the park together like we used to? Her small voice was filled with genuine sadness, and I felt my resolve begin to waver. Caroline, I said, choosing my words carefully. Grandma loves you very much, but right now, your mom and I have some grown-up problems that we need to work out. But are you going to work out the problems soon? Because my birthday is in 2 months, and I wanted to ask you for something special. There it was again. Even in a seemingly innocent conversation, the expectation that Grandma would give money for something special appeared. What did you want to ask me for, my love? I wanted to ask if you can help me buy a new dress for my ballet recital. Mommy says it costs $200 and they don't have the money this month. And there was the real reason for the call. Vanessa had used her own 8-year-old daughter as a go-between to solicit money. She had sent this innocent child to do the dirty work she could no longer do directly. In that moment, sitting in my kitchen with the phone in my hand, I understood that this war had just begun. Caroline, I said to my granddaughter with a broken heart, but a firm voice. Let me talk to your mom. There was a silence, and then I heard Vanessa's voice in the background saying, "Give the phone to Mommy, my love." When Vanessa got on the phone, her voice was different. It wasn't the hysterical desperation of the previous days. It was calculated, cold, as if she had had time to plan exactly what to say. "Hello, Mom. Caroline wanted to call you because she misses you so much. She's been so sad since you decided to cut us out of your life." Each word was loaded with veiled accusation. I hope you understand that an 8-year-old doesn't grasp why her grandma suddenly doesn't want to see her. "Vanessa," I interrupted, "you know perfectly well that I haven't cut Caroline out of my life. I've set boundaries with you and with Sebastian. Caroline can visit me whenever she wants, but you are not going to use my love for her to manipulate me." "Manipulate you?" Her voice rose an octave, feigning indignation. "Mom, Caroline needs a dress for her recital. It's a normal thing any grandma would want to do for her granddaughter. I don't understand when helping your own family became manipulation." "It became manipulation," I replied with a clarity that surprised me. "When you started using your 8-year-old daughter as a messenger to ask for money after I clearly told you I wasn't going to continue funding your lifestyle." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Vanessa spoke again, her mask of a worried mother finally fell. "You know what, Mom? You're right. Yes. I told Caroline to ask you for money for the dress, and you know why? Because you have always been the grandma who gives gifts. You've always been the one who makes special things possible. And now, out of nowhere, you've decided you don't want to be that person anymore. How am I supposed to explain that to a child?" "You explain to her," I said, feeling a new strength coursing through my veins, "that grandmas can love without giving money. You explain that healthy families don't condition their love on financial transactions. You explain that you, her parents, are responsible for covering her needs." "Her needs?" Vanessa laughed, but it was a bitter laugh, full of resentment. "Mom, we live paycheck to paycheck. Sebastian earns enough to cover the basics, but the extra things, the things that make Caroline's childhood special, have always depended on you, and you knew it. You liked being the hero, the savior, the one who made dreams possible." Her words hit me like a slap because there was some truth in them. For years, I had found my purpose, my self-worth, in solving their financial problems. I had felt proud when Vanessa introduced me to her friends, saying, "My mom is always there for us." I had enjoyed being seen as generous, as successful, as the matriarch who could solve any crisis with a check. "You're right," I admitted, and I could feel Vanessa's surprise at my answer. "I liked being the hero. I liked feeling like I was needed, that I was valuable to you." "But Vanessa, do you realize what that did to both of us? It turned you into someone who can't solve her own problems without begging for money, and it turned me into someone who didn't feel loved unless I was giving." "Don't say that," Vanessa murmured, but there was less conviction in her voice. "It's the truth, my daughter, and the worst part is, we're teaching the same thing to Caroline. She's growing up thinking that family love comes with a price, that relationships are maintained through financial transactions." There was another silence, and then Vanessa said something that broke my heart. "So what am I supposed to do now, Mom? How am I going to pay for the dress? How am I going to explain to Caroline that she can't be in the recital because we don't have the money?" For the first time in our conversation, I heard genuine vulnerability in her voice. It wasn't manipulation. It was the genuine fear of a mother who didn't know how to meet her daughter's expectations. And in that moment, I understood that Vanessa wasn't just a calculating manipulator. She was also a woman who had developed such a strong financial dependency that she genuinely didn't know how to function without my support. "Vanessa," I said gently, "have you considered talking to the ballet school? They often have assistance programs or used costumes they can lend. Have you thought about selling some things you don't use anymore? Have you looked into part-time job options?" "It's not that easy, Mom. It's not that easy." "I agree," I said. "It's not easy, but it's possible. Millions of families solve these kinds of problems every day without asking their aging parents for money." But you're not just any aging parent, Vanessa protested. You have money. You have the means to help us. Why is it so terrible that we want a little help? Because it's not a little help, Vanessa. In the last 10 years, you've asked me for over $100,000, and you've never paid back a single cent. My voice grew firmer. And because the help comes with manipulation, lies, and now even physical violence. Sebastian didn't mean to hurt you. He was just nervous. That's all. Sebastian grabbed my arm so hard he left bruises. And you saw it and did nothing to stop him. The image of that moment in the bank returned to my mind with crystal clarity. Your husband was willing to physically hurt me to get my money. And you were okay with that. I wasn't okay with it. Your silence was agreement, Vanessa. Your inaction was complicity. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, but it was as if we were speaking different languages. Vanessa saw my boundaries as selfishness. I saw her persistence as abuse. She saw my years of generosity as evidence that I should continue to give. I saw them as evidence that I had allowed a toxic dynamic to develop. When we finally hung up without having resolved anything, I sat in my kitchen feeling a mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness because I realized that maybe there was no way to fix our relationship without one of us completely changing. Relief because for the first time, I had been able to articulate my feelings without giving in to guilt or manipulation. That afternoon, I decided to do something I hadn't done in years. I went for a walk downtown by myself. I passed by stores I had always wanted to visit, but never had time for. I went into a bookstore and bought 3 novels that had been recommended to me in the support group. I stopped at a coffee shop and ordered an expensive dessert just because I felt like it. As I sat in the coffee shop savoring a piece of chocolate cake that I had ordered without calculating how much it cost, or whether I should save the money, I realized something revolutionary. I could spend money on myself without feeling guilty. I could make decisions about my own life without asking permission or justifying myself to anyone. For the first time in decades, I felt free. That night, as I read one of my new novels in the living room with a cup of hot tea, the phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, so I let it go to voicemail. But then I heard a voice that made me get up immediately to answer. "Grandma, it's Caroline, the big Caroline, your great niece. I wanted to ask you how the support group went, and I also wanted to invite you to dinner on Saturday. My dad is cooking, and I think he would like to get to know you better." For the first time in weeks, I smiled genuinely. I had lost a toxic relationship with my daughter, but I had gained something I didn't know existed, an authentic connection with family who valued me for who I was, not for what I could give. "I would love that," I replied. And as I said it, I felt a new version of myself beginning to bloom. 6 months after the incident at the bank, I woke up in a room I didn't recognize for a moment. The curtains were different, the light came in at a different angle, and the air smelled of jasmine instead of the stale perfume of sadness that had permeated my house for so many years. Then I remembered. I was in Tuscany, in a small bed and breakfast I had booked for my 2-week trip to Italy. It was my first international trip alone, and I had paid for it with my own money without asking anyone for permission. The trip had been the idea of Caroline, my great niece, who had become a constant and healing presence in my new life. "Mrs. Anderson," she had said to me during one of our weekly dinners, "you've spent 69 years living for others. It's time for you to live for yourself." She had pulled out her laptop and shown me photos of small Italian towns, of flower-filled markets, of vineyards that stretched to the horizon. "Wouldn't you like to see the world with your own eyes?" At first, the idea had seemed ridiculous. Women like me didn't travel alone in Europe. Women like me stayed home, taking care of others, waiting for life to be generous with them instead of being generous with themselves. But then I remembered something I had learned in the support group. Limiting beliefs are chains we put on ourselves. So, I booked the trip. I got a passport for the first time in my life. I bought new luggage and comfortable walking clothes. And when Vanessa found out, she called me furious. "You're spending your retirement money on a trip to Europe?" she had screamed into the phone. "Mom, that money should be for emergencies. What if you get sick? What if you need expensive medical care?" "Vanessa," I had replied, with a calmness that surprised even myself. "I have health insurance. I have enough savings for any real emergency. And after 40 years of working and saving, I deserve to spend some money on my own happiness. What about us? What if we need help while you're on vacation?" "Then you'll do what any functional adult does. You'll solve your own problems." I had hung up the phone without further discussion, and for the first time, I hadn't felt guilty for doing it. Now, sitting on the terrace of the bed and breakfast with a cup of authentic Italian coffee and a freshly baked cornetto, I remembered that conversation and smiled. At my feet, a green valley stretched out, dotted with ancient olive trees, and in the distance, I could see other travelers beginning their morning walks. Some were young couples, others were families with children, but there were also several women my age traveling alone, and they all looked radiant with freedom. My phone vibrated with a text message. For a moment, my heart raced, thinking it might be Vanessa with some new family emergency designed to make me feel guilty for being so far away. But it was Caroline, the big one. "How's the Italian adventure?" "I want to see photos," she had written, followed by several heart emojis. I sent her a photo of the landscape and wrote, "It's more beautiful than I imagined. I feel like a completely new person." Her reply came immediately. "You know what? I don't think you're a new person. I think you're finally being the person you always were, but never allowed yourself to be." Her words gave me so much to think about that I decided to walk to the village to process them. As I walked through the cobblestone streets, I thought about all the changes that had happened in the last few months. After my confrontation with Vanessa, I had expected to feel empty, without purpose. For so many years, my identity had been built around being needed, around being the problem solver, around being indispensable to my family. But instead of emptiness, I had found space. Space to discover that I liked it when I didn't have to worry about pleasing others. Space to form new friendships with people who valued me for my conversation, my humor, my perspective, not for my ability to write checks. Space to explore parts of myself that had been dormant for decades. In the support group, I had met Eleanor, a 75-year-old woman who had been through a similar experience with her son, who was addicted to drugs. We had become friends, and together we had started taking painting classes at the community center. I discovered I had a talent for landscapes, something I never would have known if I had continued to spend every free hour and every available dollar on Vanessa's problems. I had also started volunteering at a shelter for women who were victims of domestic violence. There I had met women of all ages who, like me, were learning to rebuild their lives after toxic relationships. The work was emotionally difficult, but it was also profoundly gratifying. For the first time in my life, I was helping others from a place of strength, not codependency. And most surprising of all, my finances were better than ever. Without Vanessa and Sebastian's constant demands for money, I had been able to create a real emergency fund. I had been able to invest part of my savings, and I had been able to afford small luxuries, like this trip, without worrying about the future. As I shopped for fresh ingredients to make dinner in my room's small kitchen, I got an unexpected call. It was Mr. Thompson, the bank manager who had saved me on that terrible day that now seemed to belong to another life. "Mrs. Anderson," he said in his warm, professional voice, "I hope you don't mind me calling you on your vacation. I got your number through Caroline, your great niece, because I had some news I thought you'd want to hear." My heart raced. What kind of news? "Vanessa and Sebastian came to the bank last week. They tried to access a joint account they apparently had with you for several years, an account they didn't know we had placed alerts on after the incident." I didn't know what account he was talking about, but I asked him to continue. "It seems 3 years ago, when you were caring for your sick husband, Vanessa convinced you to add her name to one of your savings accounts in case of an emergency. Do you remember that?" I vaguely remembered signing some papers during the confused days after Peter's diagnosis, when Vanessa had insisted on helping me organize my financial affairs. At the time, I had trusted her completely. "The account had $12,000. Mr. Thompson continued. They tried to withdraw everything, but our system automatically stopped them and called me. When I explained that they couldn't make transactions without your presence and explicit authorization, they became very aggressive. We had to call security. $12,000. Money I had forgotten existed. Money Vanessa had been waiting for the perfect moment to take. The day at the bank had not been their first attempt to rob me. It had just been their most desperate. "What did we do with the account?" I asked. "We transferred it completely to your name and removed all other authorized signatories. The money is safe." After hanging up with Mr. Thompson, I sat on the small terrace of my room, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. 12,000 more dollars. Money I could use for more trips, for more art classes, for more donations to causes I cared about. Money I could enjoy without guilt because I finally understood a fundamental truth. I deserved to spend it on my own happiness. The next day, my last day in Tuscany, I walked to a small cafe in the main square and sat down with my journal, something I had started writing on the support group's recommendation. In its pages, I wrote the words that would mark the end of one era and the beginning of another. Today, I don't need permission to live. I don't need to justify my happiness or apologize for taking care of myself. I spent 69 years paying to be loved, but I have discovered that true love is priceless. And more importantly, I have learned to love myself. I closed the journal and looked around. The sun shone on the ancient stones. Tourists laughed in languages I didn't understand, and I was exactly where I wanted to be, free, at peace, and finally living for myself. It wasn't revenge. It was liberation. 2 years after my trip to Italy, I woke up in a house I didn't recognize for a moment, a small cottage with a garden that I had bought in a quiet neighborhood on the other side of town. I had sold the old house where I had lived with Peter for 40 years, 6 months after returning from Europe. It was filled with too many memories, too many shadows of the woman I used to be. This new house was mine, completely chosen by me, decorated according to my tastes, with no ghosts from the past whispering to me in every corner. It was a Saturday morning, and I was making coffee in my small kitchen when I heard the doorbell. Through the window, I saw a familiar figure standing on my porch. Caroline. But not the 10-year-old Caroline who lived in my memories, but a taller, thinner version who had clearly grown a lot in these 2 years. My granddaughter was now 11, and seeing her there alone made my heart skip a beat. I opened the door slowly. "Hi, Grandma," she said in a voice that sounded more mature than I remembered. "Can I come in? I have something important to tell you." I let her in, trying to control the mix of joy and anxiety I felt. "How did you find me, my love? Do your parents know you're here?" "Aunt Clara gave me your address," Carolyn replied, sitting on my new sofa as if she had been visiting all her life. "And no, Mommy doesn't know I'm here. I told her I was going to my friend Maria's house." She looked different, taller, of course, but there was also something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. A seriousness, a determination that reminded me painfully of myself in recent years. "Caroline," I said, sitting across from her, "tell me what's going on." "Grandma, I need to ask you something, and I want you to tell me the truth." Her green eyes looked at me with an intensity that surprised me. "Is it true that Mommy and Daddy tried to steal money from you at the bank?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. For 2 years I had waited for this moment. I had mentally rehearsed what I would say to her if she ever asked me about what had happened. But now that she was here, sitting in front of me with that direct gaze, all my carefully prepared words vanished. "Who told you that?" I asked, buying time. "No one told me directly," Caroline replied, "but I've been listening. For 2 years, I've been listening to the fights, the phone conversations, the comments they think I don't understand." She paused. "And I also found some of the letters you wrote me. Mommy had hidden them in her closet." My letters. I had written them religiously for 2 years, one every month, explaining in simple words that I loved her, that the problems between the adults were not her fault. I never knew if Vanessa had given them to her. "What did the letters say, Caroline?" They said you loved me. They said it wasn't my fault we didn't see each other. They said you hoped that someday we could be together again." Her voice broke slightly. "Why did Mommy lie to me? Why did she tell me you didn't care about our family anymore?" I took a deep breath. It was the moment of truth, the moment I had been both fearing and waiting for. "Caroline, your mom and I had some very serious problems about money, adult problems that were very difficult to solve." "But is it true they tried to take all your money?" She looked me in the eyes, and I made a decision. Caroline was 11, but she had lived in the middle of this situation her whole life. She deserved an honest answer, age-appropriate, but honest. "Yes, my love, it's true." She nodded slowly, as if that confirmation had given her the last piece of a puzzle she had been putting together for years. "That's why you don't live in the old house anymore. That's why you don't give us money for special things anymore. That's why Mommy always gets sad and angry when someone mentions your name." "How do you feel knowing this?" I asked gently. Caroline thought for a moment. "Confused," she finally admitted. "Because I love Mommy and Daddy, but I also know what they did was wrong. And it makes me sad that you've been all alone this whole time." "I haven't been alone, Caroline," I said, and it was true. I've been learning to take care of myself, and I've made new friends. In fact, I've been happier in these last 2 years than I had been in a long time. I told her about my painting classes, about the volunteer work, about my new friendships. I showed her some of the paintings I had done, and I saw her eyes light up as she recognized some of the landscapes from photos she had seen online. "Grandma," she said after a while, "I want you to know that when I'm grown up, when I'm 18, and can make my own decisions, I want to have a relationship with you. A real relationship, not like before." "What do you mean, not like before?" "Before, when I came to visit, there was always something weird, like Mommy wanted me to ask you for things, or like the visits had a purpose I didn't understand." Caroline spoke with a wisdom that broke my heart. "I want to visit you just because I like being with you. I want to get to know the real you, not just the grandma who gives gifts." We hugged for a long time, and in that hug, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, genuine hope for the future of our relationship. Caroline stayed for 2 more hours. We walked through my new garden where I showed her the flowers I had planted and the herbs I was growing. We made cookies together, and as we mixed the dough, she told me about school, about her new interests, about the books she was reading. When it was time for her to go, she gave me another tight hug. "Grandma, can I ask you a favor?" "Of course, my love." "Can you keep writing me letters? But now that I know where you live, you can send them directly to me. You can send them to Maria's house, and she'll give them to me." I promised her I would, and I watched her ride away on her bicycle, pedaling with determination toward her complex life, but with a new understanding of the truth. That night, sitting in my garden with a cup of tea and my journal, I wrote, "Today, my granddaughter found me. Not the manipulated child I knew before, but a brave young woman who sought out the truth for herself. In her, I see hope that real love can survive lies, that authentic relationships can flourish even after years of toxicity." I closed the journal and looked at the stars. For the first time in my life, the future felt full of possibilities, not obligations. I was 71 years old, and I was finally learning how to live. Gefällt dir meine Geschichte und aus welcher Stadt hörst du sie? Lass uns in den Kommentaren treffen. Wenn dir die Geschichte gefallen hat, kannst du mich unterstützen, indem du mir ein Superthanks schickst, damit ich mehr solche Geschichten machen kann. Vielen Dank für deine tolle Unterstützung. Ich freue mich auf deinen Kommentar zur Geschichte. Auf dem Bildschirm siehst du 2 neue Lebensgeschichten, die ich dir wirklich empfehlen kann. Es gibt noch viel mehr auf meinem Kanal, vergiss nicht zu abonnieren. Bis zur nächsten Lebensgeschichte.